Well, everybody, good afternoon. We'll get going. First, we do roll call. AC, you want to start?
Commissioner Johnston, present.
Commissioner Schwartz, present.
Valentine, present.
Danaher, present.
Forsell, present.
Siegel, present.
Okay, great. And then we've got some oral communications, nothing to do with Kenyatta, or Castellea, pardon me, that's good. Frankie Farhat, please.
Dear members of the Utility Advisory Commission, my name is Frankie Farhat and I'm a resident of Green Acres 1. As the city is planning and budgeting future upgrades for its utility infrastructure, I would like to urge you to take into consideration the visual impact of future utility designs and to make sure that sufficient budget can be secured to rebuild the system completely underground if it is already completely underground, especially for residential neighborhoods like Green Acres 1. I know this to be feasible as it has been done already in the past in District 47, for instance. The reason why I'm bringing that to your attention today is because of our recent experience with Palo Alto Utilities. The original plan was to install above ground, large, I would say even very large, utility boxes, 4 foot by 4 foot, another 4 foot. We're talking about huge boxes. And this was the plan in spite of the fact that all the homes had already paid to have their electrical utilities put fully underground with wires, the transformers, the switches, everything 45 years ago. Our lots are small, and so the boxes would be extremely visible to any person entering our neighborhood. And also to anyone who would be living in the houses that would be hosting those boxes. I'm sure that you can imagine how those above-ground boxes would completely change the character of our neighborhood and would destroy completely its appeal. Furthermore, I would urge the city to plan ahead any street work. It seems like a big waste of time, money, and resources when streets are entirely and nicely slurred, only to be digged, patched, and repaired a few months later. I really hope that these comments will help the city make decisions that will be cost efficient, mutually agreeable to the city and to its residents, and most importantly, in line with the city's own comprehensive plan under utilities and infrastructure, where it says, while the purpose of infrastructure is usually utilitarian and functional, attention to design details can add beauty and even improve urban design. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Rules don't allow discussion here, but your points are noted on that. Then we have Eugene Lee.
Thank you. Dear members of the Utility Advisory Committee, my name is Eugene Lee, and I live in Green Acres 1 as well. You've heard shortly from my neighbor, actually, Frankie, about some of the issues that have been facing us with respect to utility underground replacement. And I want to see if I can take this opportunity to share a few of my thoughts as well. My wife and I moved to Palo Alto 18 years ago from San Francisco, and one of the reasons we purchased our home in Green Acres was because everything was underground with respect to utilities. This is something that we found extremely, and we thought from a safety, from a children's standpoint, this would be wonderful. So that's one of the reasons we purchased our home. In fact, about 10 years ago, my in-laws also purchased a home next door to mine, and we've been there happily. And then I think with the recent plan, what we discovered was that we're going to get this 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot box above ground, actually in between our homes. This is something that actually I was so surprised at. We wanted to make sure that we bring it to the attention because this is something that will certainly affect the not only aesthetic but also various other aspects of our neighborhood. And actually, there will be more than just the box between my in-laws and my home. There'll actually be 10 other boxes in our neighborhood as well. So Mr. Shibata and his team had the opportunity about 2 weeks ago to present some information to us, and it was very helpful for us. We realized that while it will be more expensive to put an underground solution in, nonetheless, one of the things we found was that our existing underground equipment, which was invested like 45 years ago, actually lasted 3 times the equipment. So as the cost of an underground system is actually less than twice what it costs of the overground solution today. are thinking of this, if I'm going to come, I realize actually, we may come out ahead now, we may not be replacing with underground solutions. But I want to bring this to your attention and think that there's potentially an opportunity for us to have a solution that allows us to maintain the integrity of our data for the next 50 years.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Jeff, please, Jeff Hoyle. You were, wanted to comment as well? A particular item? Would you rather wait till we get to that item? Okay, we'll be there. We'll be there in a moment, so we'll do that. Approval of the minutes. Were there any comments, edits on the minutes? Is there a motion to approve? Thank you, Judith. Second?
Second.
Okay, in favor? Aye. Aye. All right, minutes are approved. Reports from commissioner meetings and events. Anybody want to comment? Judith?
So one of the things I did this month was, it was a webcast, a second webcast with the Low-Income Community Solar Working Group. And what we focused on this time was looking at what were some lessons that have been applied, what were some things that have been done successfully in energy efficiency and other areas that might have implications for community solar. And one of the things we did as part of the webcast was we asked the members of the working group to comment on which things they found to be sort of immediately interesting and which things were things that they thought needed more study. And the idea that sort of generated the most interest was the idea that had to do with using community solar and funding it as one aspect of a resiliency effort, and then on a day-to-day basis, you could use it as a way to lower the bills of income-qualified customers, but you had then a resource that could command a premium price so that you had something that in the event of an emergency, and this could be integrated, not just the community solar, but with storage and other EV charging and things that could happen on an emergency basis. So I thought that was relevant for our discussions here because, again, we were looking at it from the perspective of that it sort of doesn't make sense to do community solar except as a premium product if you're just looking at it from a financial perspective, but there may be other reasons why. And so that was sort of the most popular one. The other thing is Commissioner Siegel and I met yesterday with staff to talk about some surveys that were being developed, and I'll let you add your comments, but I just want to say that it was a really nice experience to be able to sort of collaborate and discuss what were we trying to measure in a survey and what were the kinds of issues that residents would want to weigh in on, and sort of an interest on the part of the staff to sort of have this be a starting point to have more formal ways to ask and solicit input from customers. And I thought it was a very productive meeting from my part. I don't know what you want to add, Commissioner Siegel.
No, I would agree. I appreciated having the opportunity to meet and earlier on in the process so that we could, make changes if we thought we needed them.
Yeah, thank you both for making the time for that. That's great. All right, any other reports from commissioner meetings? Okay. An item here for General Manager of Utilities reports.
Thank you, Chief Dunher. So some upcoming events that will be happening for us. So one on May 7th, Council will be considering a permanent transfer of about 500,000 gallons per day of water from Hetch Hetchy, which is called an individual supply guarantee. to the city of East Palo Alto. The additional water supply is needed to support EPA's long-term water needs and several planned developments in EPA, including a primary school, affordable housing, as well as to enable EPA's new planned groundwater wells to be used on a limited basis to preserve their operational capacities as emergency backup wells. Palo Alto is in the position to alleviate EPA's long-term water supply deficits because Palo Alto has reduced its potable water consumption and extremely unlikely to rely on the full 17 million gallons that we have allocated to us on per day basis through Hetch Hetchy. Our average usage right now is right around 11 million gallons per day. So we felt that giving up a million gallons of water to them makes total sense for us. And their Mountain View is going to be giving up 1 million gallons of their guaranteed water supply. So there's other cities that are involved with giving EPA some of these water during this time frame. So council's going to be hearing this on, it's on consent on Monday, the 7th, to consider this transfer from Hetch Hetchy. The other thing is that backed by popular demand, the city's hosting the open house at the MSC this May 12th, which is a couple Saturdays away. And it's in part of the Public Service Employment Recognition Week, which is May 6th through the 12th this year. And the city's hosting a series of activities to celebrate employees and connect with the community. In addition, the Employee Appreciation Picnic and Service Awards for staff. The awards will be taken this coming Monday at council. So folks, employees that have been recognized for 30 years will be recognized by the council with that. So if you could join us on May 12th to look at behind the scenes from city to keep the community running on the MSC open house. So we'll have public works, utilities, facilities, police, fire, community services, and the warehouse will be open as well. There will be demonstrations. Should be a fun day. And that's again on May 12th from 9 to 1 o'clock. On May the 17th at 5:30 to 7:30 at the Mitchell Park Community Center, CPA is partnering with Stanford Health Improvement Program for the second time to offer interactive EV workshop. The event will include a panel discussion for long-term EV drivers and experts ready to answer any and all EV-related questions. A wide variety of EVs will be available to attend to explore. When the city hosted this last year, it was attracted and it sold out at 90 participants actually showed up. So we're expecting another large turnout for this. There are a multitude of different types of EVs that residents can actually try out and drive around. So that's on May 17th from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Mitchell Park. And the last thing I have is that maintaining native gardens and leak detections. So learn how to maintain and water conserve landscapes differ from traditional landscapings. A lecture includes maintaining drought-tolerant plants and managing irrigation systems. Issues such as fixing leaks and unclogging lines, and that's going to be Saturday, May 26th from 9 to noon at Mitchell Park at the Community Center as well. And that concludes my report.
All right. Thank you. And the May 17th event for EVs, there are all kinds of EVs. Are you going to have electric bikes there too and scooters?
I think there was, I didn't go.
I'm not sure. I think it's.
You ask some of the bike shops, they might accommodate you.
Good.
That's
I'll have to look into that.
part of the solution, I think.
Yeah, that's a helpful comment, and yeah, we'll take that and take a look at it. I mean,
All right. So any commissioner comments on items? Okay. I'll make one just because we have some citizen comments here, public comments. Maybe when we get around to our agenda for future meetings, we might have a small report on the undergrounding issues.
Yeah, we'll definitely do something on that to come back to you to talk a little bit more in detail about Green Acres as a whole, as what this whole undergrounding issue has been.
Okay.
So we can do that.
All right, great. No unfinished business, so on to new business. The first one has to do with the advanced metering infrastructure. Jeff, did you want to comment at this time? Is that on? Oh, here comes the, wait a second here. Wait a second. Thank you, Shiva.
So Jeff, just put it, there you go. Now you're good.
Okay. I guess I won't say too much about this. I sent you all a message with lots of little comments in it. Overall, I thought it was kind of not enough time for the public and for UAC to thoroughly understand the document before voting on it. But more recently, I've heard that apparently you're not going to vote on it today. You're going to send it back to staff and reconsider it another time. So that's good. The biggest thing I thought was this latest version says AMI breaks even in 18 years, and last November, the staff said it loses 7.3 million over the same time. And the difference is whether or not you count what residents save by conserving. And my feeling is that the November way of doing it is the correct way, and it loses 7 million, and Commissioner Trumbull thought that was a bad deal. And if you were here, he might still say it's a bad deal. Another point about the pilot, the time of use rate that people get now gives the discounts at night when EV users usually want to have it for charging their cars. But in the future, I think we're all thinking about the possibility that solar will be a very important source of energy, and the TOU discounts ought to be in the daytime when the sun is shining. And the question is, what would EV owners say about that? They probably aren't going to all become night watchmen. Finally, it came as a surprise to me that the water and gas meters are going to need batteries that can't be replaced, and so you have to replace the whole unit. That's going to be a cost over time. It's going to be a nuisance over time. People are going to get disconnected from the system when their batteries go out. So the question is, how do you know that that's happened and can fix it quickly? There was talk that maybe the number of samples such a meter would provide per day would be small, like 2 per day rather than once an hour or once every 15 minutes. And part of the question with that is that going to be enough information to persuade anybody to conserve? How much better is that than once a month? Another question I have is, what does the meter do that consumes power? For example, if it calculates 256-bit encryption, does that waste a lot of power? And if so, would you be tempted not to encrypt that, which you shouldn't be tempted to do? So I think that's all I'll mention for now. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. Commissioners, Judith and I spoke with Dean and Jonathan and Ed on Monday in preparation for this, and we agreed, subject to objections from here, is that this is such a meaty subject and such a big report that we'd have an introductory discussion of it today and have more time at another session, allowing us more time in the meantime to study this. And the other point that came out is, and this goes back to the joint session we had with the council, where we talked about, can we do a better job of communicating thoughts to the council on this? And perhaps not out of today's discussion, but when we are finished with recommendations on AMI, that may be a point where we want to do a memo from the UAC or some format where we can put forward thoughts in more organized fashion. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought. Dean and Jonathan or Shiva, are you going to, who's presenting?
So we'll go ahead and we'll start the discussion a little bit about this. So just to relay from Chair Danaher, so we made this decision that we thought that this report, there's so much in the report portion of it that we already kind of set the date softly that we'll bring it back to you in August. So it'll give you an opportunity to take a look at it, kind of understand it a little bit more to it. But tonight, we're going to do a short presentation on it. And Jonathan and Shiva will be talking a little bit more about the AMI system itself and what's in this report. And we'll try to go through this somewhat quickly and answer any of your questions at that point.
Jonathan Abenshine, Assistant Director of Resource Management. Good evening, Commissioners. So what you're seeing tonight in front of you, we've agreed that there's a lot of material here, and so we're going to take 2 meetings. But you may have the question of what ultimately at that second meeting we're going to be asking you to do. The recommendation is that we ask you to accept the report, and you may ask, what does that mean to us if you do that? And I think the way that we're looking at this is an initial high-level look at the costs and benefits of AMI and the maybe the 10% at a high level and a high-level roadmap for how we would actually implement and do all the work leading up to implementation. And so your vote to accept this report, we would see as an early indication that we are heading in the right direction with the understanding that there are multiple approvals, budgets, contracts, policies, and procedures that are going to have to come back for council adoption over time. And this would so this initial take would be steadily refined as we go through that process. And so I'll turn it over to Shiva Swaminathan to give you a quick overview.
Thank you, John. Commissioners, Councilmember Phil Seth. So this is you have in front of you a 80-page report from our consultant, Utility Works Consulting. They were here, if you recall, in November giving an update to the commission at that time. They're not here today, but I'll try my best to answer any questions you may have on the report itself. But more importantly, as part of our staff report, we have a kind of synthesizing what the consulting findings was and what does it mean to us, how do we want to go forward with. So that's kind of the layout. As Jonathan said, this is the first time you're seeing a thick report, and glad that you all would like to take more time to take a look at it. So I'll cover it very quickly. In 10 minutes, I'll just highlight the different areas and then open up for questions and see how far we go. Okay. So to do this report and this assessment, there's a cross-section of people who were involved. Dave Yen, from people from engineering, operations, it's a cross-section. IT, Jonathan Reichenthal from CIO was part of this exercise, and how we're coordinating this work with other areas of technology for the utilities. So just want to touch upon, the technology plan recognizes there are 3 major elements of technology projects we are going to undertake in the next 5 years. The customer information system and billing system, the enterprise resource planning system, both of which are by SAP currently, but we are right in the midst of interviewing our finalists to who the vendor is likely to be, and that'll take 2 to 3 years to implement the customer billing system. So AMI, the third piece is the AMI. And so the plan kind of lays out how does that mesh with the other technology projects. Now, these are the top 3. There are 20 others, which whether it's OMS or SCADA update or MUA upgrades, which we don't talk at length in this report, but those are other projects ongoing. But when these 3 projects get started in earnest, some of the other projects might have to be put on hold, or no new projects would come on till these are completed. So that's kind of the backdrop, a 5-year plan through 2022, 2023 timeline, and you see the timelines in your report. So that's a backdrop. And so getting into the AMI discussion, the report kind of breaks it into 9 different components, as it's up there. Let me spend half a minute on each topic, just at a high level, which it's part of the report. As we see the investment costs, the equipment and vendor costs for installing and integrating the system is about $16.5 million. We have estimated additional staffing-related costs. We typically, on capital improvement projects, we allocate existing staff cost to the capital projects to capitalize them. We're estimating about $1 to $2 million on that. So the combined CIP we have in our budgets, which you will be examining for budget projection purposes and CIP projection purposes, about $19 million, broken about $10 million for electric, $5 million for water, and about $3.5 million for gas. So total capital of $19 million. The components of it, you have it in your report. Effectively, the electric meter itself will be replaced, but the gas and water meter would not be replaced. Only the radios which go on it. And as Jeff was mentioning, yes, the water and gas radios have a battery in them. And so when the battery runs out, you take out the radio and buy a new one. But the meter itself, the meter body of the metal will be there. That won't be replaced. So that's the $19 million. That's kind of what the report talks about. And then the sources of funds. As you all know, the council and...
So that works out approximately $7 per residence, $700 per residence, and an overall budget in that
per
neighborhood.
resident?
Per residence. We have, 26,000 residences?
Correct.
Premises?
I've done that math.
What?
So 19 divided by 26, 700.
Yeah.
Sounds about
okay.
right, but it includes electric and gas as well.
Yeah, okay.
So it typically is done by number of meters. Average, so these are like 7,200 meters we're talking about, 72,000 meters. So that's 19 million, that's about $300 a meter kind of count. Good. That's a good way to look at it. And in terms of funding, we are proposing using the Electric Special Project Reserve, which was identified. This is a large $50 million reserve we have allocated for special projects, currently kind of tentatively identified for smart grid as well as the second transmission line project. So that would be a source of funds for the electric portion of the $19 million. And for the water and gas, it would be funded through ongoing, whether capitalize it or finance it over a 20-year term or 10-year term, depending on how we want to do it. So that'll be from the general electric and gas and water fund itself. So those are the two sources of funds. In terms of benefits and cost drivers, the major benefit drivers are, so we are looking, when you look at this, we are looking at the cost and benefits separately. Benefits are primarily driven by reduction in meter reading costs and increased conservation related. So if we conserve more, we buy less commodity from outside. So less electricity purchases, less gas purchases, less water purchases. So those are the primary two benefits. And in terms of financial benefits, so we looked at financial benefits. We didn't look into areas where they were hard to quantify, non-financially quantifiable benefits, like improved reliability, better customer experience, stuff like that. We did not quantify it. But the thought was if this kind of made sense without it, with it, it'll make better sense of it. As one of Jeff was mentioning, when we provided the update to you in November, the cost benefit was assessed on a net present value basis, so over the life of the project, what is a discounted cash flow of investment versus net revenues, and we thought it was a $7 million negative NPV over 18 years. So we looked at some of the numbers, and some of the two things changed, and thought was we'll have greater synergies in staffing. We might be able to accomplish compared to what the initial thought was. And the other one was there was greater confidence that we can utilize these devices for greater conservation. So those two changes in assumption has now made it on an expected basis break even. But the results also talk about the sensitivity of the results, that if those synergies don't materialize, then yes, we will be negative, maybe even up over an 18-year life of the project. So we did some sensitivities, and it's in the report. Now, assuming that the community wants to go ahead with this and it's approved, there are a number of things we need to do before we launch the installation. We'll have to look at our policies and procedures. For example, what additional risks does this new technology impose on our operations? What if there's cyber attack and we are unable to read it remotely? So there are a number of policies and procedures which have been identified in the report and summarized, which we'll have to look at. It's a citywide project. Staffing resources would have to look at organizational, because it touches on the operations of entire organization. And then on terms of community input, so this is a formal way to receive community input on this. And during the strategic planning process, there was a lot of community input on wanting to move ahead with technology-based systems, including AMI. And this is an integral part of the utility strategic plan, which identifies technology as a priority. Moving on to item number 6. So change management and communication is a key part of this project. There'll be, for example, meter reading staff will be impacted by this. So there is a transition plan being discussed and worked on. And as it will change the work function of many of the utility staff, there's a lot of concerted effort needs to go into organizational and change management ideas. And then we'll have to select the technology, which is kind of, in a sense, many sense, the easy part. The technology is mature. We are not ahead. We are kind of on the back end of things. So, so on number 7, it's the more relatively easy part. And then implementation, operational risk management. So we identified about 35 risks, which we exposed to. It's in the report. About 5 of them were identified, called out. Some of the top 5 were making sure that we have sufficient resources, given that we're doing CIS, AMI, and ERP all at the same time, that there's no staff brownout, or that there's sufficient staff resources allocated. Ensuring that the integration, we have our CIS system talking to like 10 other systems, whether it's OMS or engineering drawing systems, making sure all those pieces are integrated well. So it's in the report what all the risk factors are. And then, and then bottom line impact of this investment on the customer's utility bill and rates. So we looked at, you have in your report on a $19 million investment and allocation across, it's a winner across the full utility, but then we also looked at on individual utility basis. Okay, how do we allocate that $19 million to each utility? What is the value? So that's all at the back of the model. And so, and on each utility, it is still a NPV positive, and the overall impact on the residential customer on a bill basis is neutral. So that's a scenario, and there are sensitivities around it. In the worst case scenario we've looked at, it may be a 0.35 to 0.7% impact on bill if some of the costs are incurred, but the benefits do not materialize as projected. So that's kind of a quick summary of the report. In terms of next steps, there's a start of a conversation. How the commission wants to continue this conversation, it's up to for you all to decide. But the tentative thought, as Dean outlined, is in August timeline. We'll come back again for further discussion, formal. And then as Jonathan outlined, we want, and the reason we're having the discussion today is because we're doing it along with the rest of the budget. Some of these capital investments have already been budgeted into the CIP budgets, which you will be considering tonight. And so we'll go after the UAC approval in September, we'll go to council. And then we'll take once the CIS and ERP implementation timelines are finalized by the end of the year and middle of next year. It's expected to begin implementation by summer of next year. At that point, we'll have a little bit more certainty of how we want to position our implementation timeline with respect to them. So it'll be fall before we finalize these plans, and we'll keep the commission informed as we go along. So that's all I have at this stage. Questions?
Thank you very much. I'd like questions and discussion.
So I appreciate the fact that you've looked carefully at the risks that you see here. And I guess I had two questions along those lines. One is you do a sensitivity analysis about the net present value, and I see that in Table 5 on page 10, but I'm not quite sure where from that you come to the conclusion that the most likely net present value is basically zero.
Right. So it was. So we made certain assumptions to begin with, not looking at any sensitivities around it. So we looked at industrial literature about how much do you think there'll be conservation with customer interface with AMI. So we don't. And so we looked at that literature and came up with assumptions. And the assumptions were about 2% incremental conservation as a result. Depends on the rate, on the type of customer, electric or gas utility. There are different numbers which you have outlined in your report. So we made that's assumption number one, a driver for the value. The second, so we made some assumptions and then came up with a value. And then we changed the assumptions from that value and came up with NPV. So it was. Does it answer your question? So
I guess what I'm saying is there any kind of more detailed analysis of how you got to the basically zero net present value other than the table on page 5, which basically says, well, here's what happens. Here's the cost if we don't achieve this savings, and here's the cost if we don't achieve that savings.
Right.
But I don't see an assessment of the likelihood of the risk of not achieving each of these.
Yes, so you're right, Commissioner. We don't have a probability, but how we derive those numbers is based on Table 2 and 3. So in terms of costs and values, we know with relative certainty the capital cost. So we didn't change that around. Because it's nothing new, people have done it. We had a good consultant who is doing it. Hopefully, if we get it done within the next 5 years, that's a relatively good number. What with the greatest uncertainty which we have, and it's a large uncertainty, is the ongoing operational and maintenance cost and value we can harvest out of those systems. That's a big uncertainty. And we've laid out in Table 2, for example, here is a benefit projections and the assumptions behind it. And So this contributes towards that NPV. If you lower these numbers we made assumptions, hey, what if these numbers of value of conservation is reduced by a half? What would the NPV be? That's what you see. So it is the input which is modified, and the output is what you see in that summary table. Does that answer your question?
That's helpful. I guess I'm still would like to kind of see how the numbers play out. But just another question about the risks. In the report, there's a table, and it's categorized into kind of red, yellow, and green, depending on the level of danger from the risks. One of the risks that you report as being a serious one, and I agree, is the risk that the systems won't talk well to each other. And I guess my question is, is there not experience from other cities that have put AMI into place that we can look to kind of minimize the risk that these systems won't interact the way we hope they will?
Right. So yes, as there are many systems out there. So that's probably was identified as a low risk. That's why it didn't rise to the top 5. But I think in the CIS there's 2. So AMI, that's less of a risk. For CIS, because CIS talks to 10 other systems, whereas AMI talks to a couple of systems. The CIS is a couple of systems. They don't necessarily talk to all of the systems. So, I don't believe that rose to the top. It is identified probably as one of the. I think there's a risk of integrating with other systems. Integration risk, not that we do a good job of integration. Not that it wouldn't happen, but you just do it within budget as planned and within expectations. Does that?
One of the key ways of controlling that risk is going to be to hire an excellent implementer who's done this before and worked with other utilities that have our sort of profile. And so we're talking to, we're looking at a few different avenues to make that work.
I mean, I appreciate the fact that other utilities may not have the same configuration of software and so on that we are hoping to have at the end of this project, but given the importance of making sure that the systems all do function well together, obviously the more information we can get from others who have these systems in place, the lower the risk is. I just think that's really important.
Thank you. Just to add on to what John was saying, part of this $19 million is a $1 million contract with expert project managers who have done this multiple times and continue to do it day in, day out as we speak. So that's where we bring in the expertise who not only understand the industry, but also understand us. So that's where most of that expertise is going to come from.
And these are consultants who are familiar with the CIS system that we have and ERP system that we have. That we'll have, right. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on that with the consultant, that $1 million contract, that's just for the AMI piece, or is that also integration of CIS or the ERP piece at all?
So the $19 million, what we talked about, is only for AMI, but AMI as it relates to integrating with the CIS. So it includes the CIS integration piece. Now the CIS project itself is different. That doesn't have a budget to, say, integrate with the new AMI. That doesn't have that budget. This one has that budget to integrate with the CIS system, because CIS system will be going first. And this AMI, when this AMI project comes, the cost of integration with the CIS is within the AMI budget.
the implementation of the CIS piece will impact the ease of integrating AMI with CIS. So presumably, some of the CIS implementation has to be anticipating
Yes.
the AMI
yes,
system, right?
Yes. Yeah, so as we speak, yes. In fact, the consultant who is helping us with the CIS and ERP system has several subcontractors helping us. So one of the subcontracts they are employing of AMI to understand the AMI integration piece is the same consultant as who kind of is part of this effort. So yes, so there are tentacles across all these. There's no direct connection or integration between AMI and ERP, only between AMI and CIS. So this cost and expertise we'll have to acquire to integrate CIS with AMI.
Is it diesel run Wednesday? I think so too. Which relates to my question. It'd be neat if you could humor me and add a risk called if the elements of the infrastructure to support the excellent telemetry that you would create didn't have backup systems all the way through, like the diesel that we're running right now. Then, in the event of a large earthquake or other significant catastrophe that the utility is trying to recover from, you might lose your entire telemetry network and not be able to see all the meters, which would tell you exactly where the problems are, even though I know it's not as good as having the telemetry to the transformers that we have to deal with up at the distribution level. But if you had, all these nodes, and if those are going to little data collection boxes per neighborhood, and those have no backup power and went out the moment the utility went out, that'd be a disappointing result, I think, for the whole project.
Correct. So they are called the collectors.
Yeah.
All of the collectors have backup batteries.
Right, but you probably want to assess like how long, and that needs to tie up with utility goals around how long outages would be and things like that. Because I think the numbers we talk about for recovery from an earthquake are significantly longer than you're going to get from batteries. Just as a risk.
Okay.
Thanks.
I mean, one of the features of the battery, one of the intentions of the battery is to pass on that last gasp of information from all of the meters out at the nodes. And so if you have, from all of the meters, so that you get at least a snapshot of what the system looked like when the earthquake hit, and then part of the disaster recovery process is getting the collectors back up and running and getting real-time telemetry back up.
I could imagine it being kind of a little bit like, the cascaded design that has to go into circuit breakers, because if your main hub receiving the data doesn't stay up to get that blast of data, then you lost it. Right. So, I mean, when I think of the little pieces of what goes into that risk design, I could think of a lot of, it's not trivial.
Yeah. I'm not actually really understanding that, but we can have offline conversation on that.
Okay.
Because the meters themselves are not controlling the loads, which is
no, I totally understand that.
right. So,
right. So if we have an earthquake or some sort of disaster that affects one part of Palo Alto much more than another part.
Oh, okay.
But often in those events, the entire electrical infrastructure will go down, even though the damaging event might be rather localized.
Okay.
The whole feed from PG&E may go down.
Okay.
And so you've got this, you've got a rather textured response from all the nodes. Mm-hmm. That if you could get all the data home, it would tell you exactly where the problem just happened. Mm-hmm. But if your receiving assets somehow also lose power or don't have enough battery to ride through that, then the data doesn't get to your main computer asset. which might be backed up by the diesel like we just saw.
Right, and we've had presentations on the, I'm sorry. We've had presentations on those collectors. They're designed to deal with exactly that problem. The battery is intended to get you,
Through the,
get all that information back home to the main
From the time
system.
of outage. But I thought you were getting to get the system back up.
well, the longer they last, the more they help you restore the utility.
So I think that what Commissioner Valentine's really talking about, so it's simply, as if you remember back in 2010 when the airplane took out the lines. So what ended up happening is that traffic lights were up for about 4 hours. The backup flash was only up for 4 hours, but we were out for a total of 10 hours. So his point is that, you know, when these collectors go down, we're not going to be able to see further into whatever the timing of the battery portions of it. So it's definitely something we should probably take a look and find out, you know, how long that battery is going to last.
It's days. I'm not sure whether it's weeks, but it's days.
It's days? Okay. Cool.
Great, thank you.
Lisa?
Let's see, I just wanted to comment on the NPV calculations, which are, you know, by definition, gazing into a crystal ball. And I guess I wanted to say, I don't think we should hold ourselves to a standard that they have to be positive NPV in all cases. If we feel that you know, there might be non-quantifiable benefits that we simply want to purchase, and that comes at a cost. So drilling in on those a little bit, there's system reliability. Well, you mentioned just in your opening comments, system reliability and better customer experience. And if you want to add to that list, we certainly can. But I guess I was hoping, in terms of system reliability, my impression is that our utilities already are extremely reliability. So sort of like how much improvement is there out there to be caught with an AMI system is one of my questions. And in particular, is it different for the electric versus the gas versus the water utility? I'll pause there and let you respond, and then I have a follow-up.
Okay. So on the reliability on the electric, we're kind of talking about two things here. One is when there's an outage happens, how quickly do we bring it back on? How quickly do we detect it, where it is, go to the location, identify, so to turn it back on a shorter duration. The other one is proactively avoiding such outages, whether it's, so in terms of, so we looked at both, I mean, that's the way to look at it on both sides. Yes, for how much better could we get? I will try our best every time to get that.
Aren't we already at 99 point something?
If you were to visit Japan or Korea, they view our electrical utility reliability as extremely poor. The notion that
Our American or our Palo Alto?
Both, doesn't matter. I mean, if you read through, we're going to say we're going to lose an hour a year. They would take a very dim view of the goal of not having power for an hour a year.
We've had major, like, neighborhoods out every single month.
Yeah.
It's not like it never happens.
Yeah, Duveneck had an outage only a couple years ago.
And statistically, you may, yes, it
So
may be the fifth
statistically
or
might not
sixth
be the right
digit.
way to think about it. Anecdotally might be the stronger to think about.
Yeah, and it's a matter of, okay, a neighborhood is out, we think it can be up in 2 hours. This perhaps could reduce it by 15 minutes, so 1 hour, 45 minutes. So be able to identify the location sooner.
Did you just say it would speed up by 15 minutes?
I'm just
So it would
making
go
up an
from 2
example.
hours
I'm
to
just
1
making
hour
up-
and 45 minutes?
I'm looking to Dean. I'm just making up an example. It's a location, there is letting us know something happens sooner before the customer has to call. That's a time saving. I don't know it's minutes or seconds. And then triangulating it to where it is. So this one will help us triangulate sooner and then get the customers, the trouble crew there sooner. So what I'm saying is, I'm just making up a number here. If it's a 2 hours restoration time from the time of outage, this perhaps could save you. That's the order of magnitude.
And what I'd add to that is that 80% of our load being commercial, the economic value of 15 minutes or 30 minutes is a lot higher with some of these commercial customers. So I think they see
That was actually one of my follow-ups, was to sort of, if you could expand on how if there are differences in how we think about system reliability for commercial
Yes.
and for residential customers.
So there were numbers. We actually did try to monetize it. There are these industry numbers for this type of commercial customer. A minute outage is worth $100,000. For this type of commercial customer, residential, there are industry statistics. But since our reliability was so good, you put in all those statistics and make these assumptions. It's from those statistics, if you make certain assumptions, those are in the tens of thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars a year. So they were relatively small numbers, from that perspective. So again, we are still on the first aspect of how can we get the outage back up sooner. And the second part is how do we proactively
Go ahead.
avoid outages? And that's related to primarily on distribution transformers. If they get overloaded and blown up, we can proactively monitor them to say, hey, this transformer is overloaded, because we can now see what are the loads being served by that transformer and proactively upgrade the transformer or do something proactively. So those are the two ways in which the reliability can be enhanced for the community. Or at least not decline. It could decline, because with EVs and all these, we are in a good place now, but with additional EVs, and if we don't do it
Future
proactively.
proofs for a potentially different future load profile and geographic distribution of the load profile.
Correct.
But just to add on to that, from a reliability standpoint, not every customer goes out and just gets a charger that they put on the side of their home. What they'll do is they'll plug actually into the wall for a level 1 or level 2. And so we never, from a utilities perspective, we'll never see that increase. But now with this type of system in place, as Shiva was describing, we'll be able to actually see what our transformers, or what a particular transformer is actually being loaded at a period of time. So we can be a little bit more proactive in going out there and changing that transformer and updating it and getting a larger transformer in place. So it will help us in that aspect.
Although I assume that there has been some financial calculation of that, like that's not the non-quantifiable, there's an estimate of that kind of work that feeds into the NPV calculation that we have. The ability
Yes.
to
Yes. So,
replace transformers before you have to, kind of thing.
Yes.
correct. So those are wild guesstimates. So that's why we didn't want to necessarily, they're not big, huge numbers,
Right.
but the outage which it caused, the customer experience part.
Right, so that's maybe a good way to segue into the other part of sort of this idea that another non-quantifiable benefit, tongue twister, is a better customer experience. What beyond EV drivers were asking for time of use rates so that they could charge more cheaply at night? What are the other customer experience benefits that we think about when we think about them?
I think these, let me throw out the top 5 which comes to my mind right away. I mean, if someone thinks they have been billed for water use, they pick up the phone, hey, my bill is high, what's going on, guys? So the CSR, customer service representative, could quickly go on and say, hey, on that particular day, you're filling your pump or your pool or what. So able to quickly resolve an issue, enhance the CSR's ability to resolve an issue it's an example. We talked about restoration, if we can improve the restoration. And inform related to that is proactively call the customer and say, we know the system is out, and we know with certainty, even without them calling us. Sooner, and then send the right price signals to the customers, because now we are facing very diverse price signals in the market, providing them, and that results in lower costs compared to otherwise. Anyone else?
Any significant ones on the commercial side that we wouldn't think of for residential?
On the commercial side, demand response. So a lot of their charges are based on capacity fees, and if they can reduce their capacity, so tying their whether it's with battery systems or participating in our demand response program. Currently, we have kind of quasi-smart meters in commercial customers. That's how we do our pilot demand response program for commercial customers currently, but it'll enable us to do a better job, and that'll tie in with their building management system, so the signal from the smart meters, which they will have access to, can directly tie to their building management system, and then they can respond automatically without a human intervention.
Sure.
And in an age where middle of the day, so whether it is electric vehicle charging during daytime, if the electric vehicles are metered on an individual basis, those can enjoy, we can provide other price signals to those electric vehicle chargers. So
Great list, thank you.
We're going to save Judith for the last because she's the most knowledgeable, so you get the less educated questions first. Jeff raised a question in his communication to us a few days ago of would we be better off, would it save money in the installation of this if we had done the fiber to the premises first? What part of the system, I guess it's just the RF connections, would be saved? Is that a significant part of the 19 million?
no. So there are two things when we talk about connecting to the fiber. We are not, so.
Well, that's a good enough answer. We'll go on. We've got a lot to cover today.
Okay.
So smart meters have been started putting in the mid-90s, so 25 years before we start. So there's ought to be a lot of experience out there, and I'm sure Judith will comment on that somewhat. But when you look at our NPV numbers, for example, have those been informed by the experience of other utilities? Do we have studies from those or say, here's what we achieved in the way of reduction of use, or here's what we achieved in reduction of operations? That's where the numbers come from?
Yep.
Okay, that's comforting.
Yep.
One other, and I assume our consultants and the like, they're drawing on the experience of other communities and states that have put these in as you enumerate the benefits and.
Correct.
Okay. One question on the NPV, because a lot of it is staffing savings. When you do that calculation, do you take into account the escalation in labor costs over the
Yes.
period? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
So the assumption is on the conservative side. So costs increase by 3%, benefits increase by 1%.
Okay.
That's how the
All right. Great.
assessment.
So Judith, I'd like if you could chime in here. Thanks.
So first of all, I just want to say I'm really glad we're finally getting to talk about this. I've been waiting a long time on the UAC for this to come to the fore. So one of the things that I think both the UAC and the City Council and the citizens of Palo Alto can be reassured about is that there are a lot of examples of how this has worked and where it's added value, and so we're not pioneers here. Now, we have some opportunities to leapfrog, and we don't have to go through some of the painful lessons that others went through. And so I think we can learn from other mistakes. And there are also technologies and applications that are now becoming available that we can just go to right away. One of the things that was sort of an interesting thing in terms of sequence of which parts of the system would get put in first. And one of the things that happened with the ARA funding is the meters were often put on first before the back-end systems were in place. And you had a few utilities like Blue Bonnet Electric Cooperative in Texas that put the back end first, and one of the advantages of doing that was that then they could offer more options and services for day one benefits once they put the meters on. So the fact that we're doing the CIS first is actually something that can be really effective. Now, it's only really effective if we get to what you're talking about and we anticipate what we're going to want to do with AMI once we have it. So one of my recommendations that we discuss with the consultant is that we look at the kinds of functions that we are potentially going to want to do to make sure that the CIS will accommodate it day one, and it won't require to have to go back and redo anything. And again, that is, again, that's something that you can do. So all the problems and pitfalls that other utilities have had, we do not have to suffer those problems. Another thing that I just want to say in terms of looking at the value, while most of the business cases were made on labor savings, it has turned out that outage detection, which was initially perceived as a value to the utility and not to customers, has turned out to be incredibly popular, that people really like it, that if they can be told, hey, my electricity's out now, but it's going to be back on probably within 2 hours, and the fact that they can come back and say, okay, they can ping the meter and say, okay, it's back on, has turned out to be tremendously popular all over the country, okay? It's one of those things. And even better than that is leak detection. So think about the uproar that we had over the summer where people got excessively high bills because they didn't know they had a leak, and all of a sudden, well, you can run reports that if something is out of whack, you can know it right away. And whether the person is monitoring their own usage or not, to have exception reporting is something that's infinitely preferable. Now, another thing that isn't in this yet, that is one of the things that has proven to be something that has tremendous value, is the idea that when you have an endpoint device that communicates on everybody's home or business, that means the utility can offer different programs to different people. So if you want to have the greenest program, you want to get the information about when to use your electricity, when you are going to have the smallest carbon footprint, and your next door neighbor wants to have the program that lets them save the most money, okay, you can both have those, okay? And it's perfectly reasonable to do. And so one of the things that I think will come back to us as a group is to be looking at what are the kinds of consumer and business-facing programs that allows this kind of variability, and they can be managed in a very reasonable way. Another thing that I think is going to be very appealing to the community in Palo Alto is this appetite that there are portals now that are being developed that you can have a one-stop shop to say, hey, I'm looking at EVs. What would be the right EV for me? What would be the right refrigerator? Oh, I really, Arnie's going to want to look at the data to see how something's working. I may not want to look at the data. So he can have an application that lets him do that. I can say, I don't care about that. And so that idea of the variability, because when people get to have something that supports what their energy worldview is, they're much happier, okay? Now, I want to address one of Jeff's other points that he had made in his note, okay? And that has to do with opting out. I think if there is one lesson that we can take away, is that if somebody doesn't want to be part of this, they should be able to opt out, okay? It should be simple, it should be upfront, it should not be a fight. If we want to say that there's a cost for meter reading, fine, but it's been less than 1% in almost every jurisdiction has been less than 1% of people have opted out. But if somebody is really emotional about it or feels very strongly, you cannot convince them. And so the way to not have that as a problem, just say, if you don't want this in your house, you don't have to have it, and we'll figure something else out, okay? And so that, I think, is one that, as a policy thing, we ought to really make sure that is in our plans. Another thing that I just want to talk about, because it's something that someone just demonstrated at the Low Income Energy Issues Forum workshop that I went to recently, that was fabulous was a company that is doing what they're calling an account reconciliation app. And basically what that's done is they have a prepay application that allows people to, that's fairly common. I mean, prepay apps are all over the place. That basically you say, I'm going to put in $5, $10, $100, whatever into my account, and you'll let me know how it's doing, okay? What they've done is looked at how this can be applied to post-pay customers also, and it became really clear that you could also do that if you were generating electricity either on your home solar or on your community solar, that you could have a sense of what you're doing. And the way they've designed it is you can put more money in whenever you want, and and it's really cool. And the advantage of that, instead of a conservation effect of 1 or 2%, we're talking conservation effects of 17%. People really 14 to 17%. So when people are paying attention to this stuff, they really it can be framed in a way that's really meaningful. And if the visibility that you want is you want to see your carbon footprint because that's what you care about, then that's the way you look at it. If you care about your bill, you look at it that way. So I just want to say that it's a very exciting time. There are a lot of opportunities that we'll have. Our ability to leapfrog will be the way we deal with our management of gas resources as well as water. I think that where there are utilities that are integrating both, people really like it, and they can give as much attention to it as they want. And if it's somebody where you just want to get a bill and you don't want anybody to bother you, that's cool too. So it's not requiring that everybody become an electrical engineer or a conservation guru. You can have it to the level that you care about. And I think we should look at it as a fundamental technology like a router in your house. Okay, so we don't talk about the internet in terms of routers. We talk about the internet in terms of the applications that each of us want to use. And so someone wants to watch movies, somebody else wants to play games, whatever it is. That this is really a technology platform that allows certain things to happen. If there are ways to monetize your energy usage data that become available, we can have privacy and security things in place so that gets to be, that people get to say, I give permission or I don't give permission. But there are things that are coming down the line that are happening today, and we're going to be able to be in a position to take advantage of those, especially if we look at this in a forward-thinking way. And so the financial costs, I just want to say in closing that the dollar per what it costs to have a meter on a house is not really what the value is for this technology. It's what the larger system-wide benefits you can have.
Really appreciate all those comments and the fact that you've spent so many years working with this. I'd like to close off this discussion and move on to the budget. And is that all right with everybody? Okay.
So first of all, I just wanted to thank the Commissioners Siegel, Fussell, and Johnson for sitting down with us and going through our budget. We talked a little bit about the CIP portion of it, of the committee, gave us some great input as we move through that. There's also been some great questions from all of you about the budget. So tonight we're going to discuss our funds, looking at from our expenses to the operational costs, and also looking at talking about the rates and how they impacted those funds from that. And so with me is Dave Yen, our manager of strategic and budget guru, and we'll both kind of walk you through the budget. Thanks.
All right. Good evening, commissioners and council member. And like Shiva's concise 2-slide presentation. I think I have like 35 slides, just warning you. So we'll pace ourselves. All right, first off, we're going to do some highlights of the utilities overall as a department. So as you all know, we've adopted the 2018 Utility Strategic Plan. That was like an 8-month process. We engaged internal, external stakeholders, had many workshops, and we've identified 4 main priorities for the next few years: workforce, collaboration, technology, financial and resource optimization. Another major accomplishment was we began the construction of Upgrade Downtown. This has been a 2-year effort, working with all multi-departments. There's planning, there's transportation, there's utilities, public works, and city manager's office. So I'm glad to say that has started. It's expected to be completed by Thanksgiving of 2018, at least the university section, and the side streets should be done hopefully by March of 19. And I also want to recognize that we received multiple awards through the year for being a leader of environmental sustainability, local solar per capita, and energy savings, and a reduction of carbon footprint. Upcoming initiatives for next year is basically centered around the strategic plan. So workforce, improve employee retention and recruitment, find better work scheduling, accommodate employees, strengthen coordination and collaboration and communication within the city and also with the community. Implement the technology roadmap. As Shiva discussed, the AMI is a big game changer for us, and also the CIS upgrade, and we're also going to have a new customer portal, hopefully by the end of the year. And finally, our proactive infrastructure replacement program. So this was also brought up by the Finance Committee. This is part of the cost containment strategy, and also of being proactive in replacing our infrastructures. So these are some of the significant requests for this upcoming budget. For operations, for electric, we're requesting for $1 million additional to hire contractors to help out with our overhead construction for both maintenance and CIP work, and for another $1 million for the gas safety cross-border program. So I'll talk a little more of these two in detail when we go through those funds. We have one staffing request, and that's to reclassify a business analyst to a senior business analyst to reflect the current duties and future duties. This individual will be highly involved with both the CIS upgrade and the smart grid implementation. And finally, a couple capital improvement projects I want to call out is the relocation for Caltrain to convert their diesel trains to electric, and also the seismic water upgrades for our reservoir tanks. They're about 50 years old now, and they're coming to the end of their life. Any questions on these before I keep moving on? However, you guys feel free to pause me anytime. Overall rate changes, this is a slide. So the average residential rate is going to increase about $11, which is about 4%. So we're proposing a 6% electric increase, 4% gas increase, 11% wastewater, and 3% water. And storm drain has a CIP increase of 2.9%. Even with these new rates, the electric for the average neighboring city, we're still about 38% below. For gas, we're 14% below. Wastewater, we're about 33% below. But water, we are actually 18% above. So that number, we're still higher, but it's not as high as it was before. So we're catching up to them. So this is the overall utilities budget. It's about $301 million. And these are the main cost drivers. So again, it's mostly commodity, CIP, salaries and benefits, and the general fund transfer. Okay. And here is a trend line of our historical CIP spending for all the utilities. As you see in the outer years, they're going up quite a bit. And just to reflect the current construction costs have gone up 50 to 100% for most of these utilities, and also for one-time projects such as AMI and the seismic water improvements. Questions?
I talked with Ed and Jonathan on Monday. It was to point out if there are any particular points here where you guys debated internally. Should it be in or out? Is there some program you've left out of this that you might have liked to have had, or something you put in that there was debate about?
So for CIP work, we did work with all engineer multiple times, we did many iterations. So it was based on priority and what they have resources available for.
Okay.
So we did go through that.
Thanks.
So now I'm going to jump over to the electric fund. Okay. So the accomplishments for the electric fund is we completed the underground 47, which is bounded by those areas you see up front, Middlefield, Homer, and Webster. We've also completed installation of new fiber optic cables for the storm monitoring over at Adobe Creek, East Meadow, and Maybell substations as well. And we've also completed interconnection agreements to install 2 solar panels at the 2 city garages at Bryant and Webster. And upcoming initiatives for the electric fund is assessing the distribution system to integrate with the DER technologies like EVs and solar PV, determining the second transmission line source. So our preferred option right now is to connect with the SLAC in Stanford. So we will contact them again and see if they want to move forward. Otherwise, we'll have to look for an alternative solution. And finally, we are replacing our transformers at some of these substations. These are over 40 years old, so it's about time to replace to increase the reliability and also capacity.
A quick item on the replacement of infrastructure. I got to sit in on a very nice presentation about a week ago where a switchgear company was explaining their newly developed capability to sense the RF emissions when you start to have something that's just beginning to arc fault. So it's, you're starting to have that buzz to ground. And it struck me as relatively low in cost. They end up putting both current and voltage sensing pieces into the switchgear cabinet. And then all of a sudden they can tell when and this is specifically for medium voltage gear, doesn't work at 480 or 240 or anything, but up at medium voltage it would work. And then they can start to see the onset of anything that's going to turn into a catastrophic ground fault and blow out a transformer, blow out a circuit breaker, cause you to lose a fuse, whatever. And struck me as an extremely powerful tool. On my submarine, we implemented arc fault detection, which of course is slightly different because now you're actually having the arc and you're coordinating the breakers to isolate the fault more quickly. This was the onset, and even more proactive than arc fault detection, and it was so simple because all they needed was some coupling capacitors, and then they could sense the RF signature and just trigger off that, and either send a signal or open the circuit.
And what was their name?
Well, this happened to be an Eaton presentation, but I would imagine that whether you're talking to Schneider or Eaton, I mean,
Or
I would think
Cooper,
they've
maybe.
all, when you think about it, like that's a pretty straightforward thing to do. But if you're going to the trouble of replacing a transformer, perfect time to, that way it comes back to the points earlier of, how do we make sure we have in the budget so that when we put things underground, it doesn't end up costing you more to operate them when there's a fault.
Yes.
So as part of this, so the budget contains a purchase order for, to be able to order new transformers and the
Yes.
long lead time items?
Yes, there is.
Okay, great.
There's a system improvement, CIP, that purchases transformers and switches. And you're right, those are usually 6 months to a year, usually lead time.
Okay.
My other question was in the longer report we've got. I know this is kind of an annoying thing to think about, but what if you started, and maybe you have internal metrics for not just the duration of outage or average duration of outage, but also number of outages or even the distribution of outages. Because if you were, if I think back to the discussion we had 6 months ago where we had a person who couldn't get their garage door to open, right? If you're trying to figure out how to design the system, you kind of need to know a little more than, well, the average outage in Palo Alto is an hour. And then that might help you start to build support for the metrics, like, well, I want my distribution tighter, which comes back to all the, how do you get into your transformers? So if there's a transformer in a vault that fails, you know which one. Or if it's one of the transformers up on the pole, however many thousand that have no telemetry, it starts to help you build a case for putting that telemetry in to tighten that distribution and then move it to the left to make the outage duration shorter and shorter and shorter.
So we do keep track of both the number of outages and the duration.
Yeah, I figured you did.
Okay. And that's how we troubleshoot and
Right.
decide on our CIP plans and prioritize.
Yeah, I guess I'm more thinking if, it's probably not the most fun metric to put in our big report, but if you did, then that would help you to build justification maybe for the expense of that telemetry.
Okay, thank you. All right. Sorry, this is like an eye chart. So on the right side is the commodity. So this is also the cost drivers for the electric fund. So 50% is from the commodity, and to the right of that is the distribution of the commodity, like the breakup. Like we spend 45% of our budget on renewables, 23% on transmission costs, and another 13% on Western for hydro, and so forth. So things to note mainly is just, again, commodity makes up the most, or 50% of the budget for electric fund.
So that's not the volume of power that's produced, it's what we're spending.
What we're spending for each of those resources, yes, those supplies.
So my takeaway from this chart is you don't have much control, much ability to control expenditures other than putting off CIP.
Right, and say if vacancy savings or...
Yeah, because you have to buy the commodity. The equity transfer really isn't a spend, that's just a council decision on that. The rent you can't do much about. So staffing, you have very small amount of discretion. So you really don't have a lot of discretion in this except which capital projects you.
That's correct.
Or which commodities we buy.
Or which commodities, that's a fair point, yep. And a lot of those are locked in for a long term.
Okay. So these are significant changes from FY18 to FY19 budget. Commodities decreasing about 2 million or 2%, and that's because we're planning to purchase less market purchases because we have a higher supply of hydro this year or next year. CIP is expected to decrease by 3.3 million, and that's because of a couple projects we had slated for this year are being deferred. One is the Veterans Hospital, and the other one is the Caltrain relocation. So these are things we don't really have control of, so we have to partner with them and wait till they make their decisions before we can move forward. And finally is the overhead contract. So I think we've brought this up to you before where we have a lot of vacancies in the linesperson classification. These are the guys who work on the poles. So I think we have about 16 positions, authorized positions, and we have currently 4 vacancies. But the problem is half the people that are staffed are currently at apprentice levels. It takes about 3 or 4 years for them to become a journeyman. So it's very junior level staff. And we're also having hard times retaining some of the senior folks. So as a result, we're going to hire this contract crew to help us out whenever we need them, as on an as-needed basis. So the highlights, like I said,
Just go back to that slide for a bit. So it's $900,000 for that contract group.
the contract's going to be 1.5 million actually per year is what we're recommending.
Okay.
It'll be a 3-year contract.
All right.
And we have some savings and contract dollars right now.
Okay, I'm guessing you could use a fraction, some portion of that to hire senior experienced contractors, not contractors, but keep people on payroll for a longer term, fill those vacancies.
Yeah, that's more of a
Maybe
city.
you've got to work within budget or something, but this is a more expensive solution to improving salaries for the key people.
You know, the other thing is we have to work with the SEIU unions on that. And actually, their contract is coming open at the end of this year. So it's something that we've been thinking about, that how do we strategize on looking at these critical positions that, there's 600 employees approximately in the SEIU, but, we have to kind of
How
look
can
at,
you get
where do you find that?
discretion to pay extra amounts for
Right.
critical positions?
Right.
Because this is
Yeah,
costing
critical.
you can pay an extra 100,000 to 4 people, and you'd save a lot.
Yep, exactly.
Yes, we'll definitely have to revisit our hiring strategy for lines people this year.
Okay.
All right, some CIP projects. So these are kind of the average we spend per year. So customer connections, 3 million. Overhead underground conversions, rebuilding underground projects, substation improvements I mentioned earlier. And the two big projects that are in the upcoming budgets, or the next year's 5 budgets, is the Caltrain relocation and the smart grid. So the smart grid's about 19 million, but 10 million of it is from the electric fund, or the electric special project reserves, actually. So it shouldn't impact rates. And here is the 5-year budget for CIPs. And the number on top represents actually the revenue. It's the customer reimbursement and also transfers from the other funds. Like for instance, in the years 21 through 23, we're getting reimbursements from the gas and water fund for the smart grid project. All the project's being funded out of the electric fund, but it will get transfers back from the other utilities. Questions? Oh, go ahead.
Because we have some folks here who are who feel very passionate about their underground. I had the experience the other day where, because of being on the UAC, I found myself, I was driving through one neighborhood and I realized, oh, they have underground utilities here. And then I drove into my neighborhood and we have above ground, and so I was like, oh, okay, I never noticed that. And I live in a beautiful neighborhood and it didn't seem, and I'm just curious obviously if someone has it and they really love it, that they feel passionate about protecting it, whereas my priority would be for reliability and the ability to detect a problem and things like that. So how is that something that maybe as we sort of develop surveys and kind of think about how we want to talk to residents about it, to sort of get a sense of people's relative priorities, because you have these trade-offs between what it costs to do it, the ability to detect an outage or fix a problem, it costs more money, so therefore the rates have to go up to support it. And so, as we sort of do these trade-offs, to kind of understand these things holistically. Is that something that you have on your radar yet, or could we add that?
So right now, what we do is we actually do surveys in the areas. So when we look at from an overhead to an undergrounding, and we kind of define the area where we're going to go, first of all, we have to get AT&T to buy in with us, because they're not always wanting to get into the residential areas. They have their own rules and regs that they follow. So we have to work with them to figure out where we can really go with this. Otherwise, those costs could be passed on 100% to us. But once we define where the area is, then what we do is we put a survey out to the customers at that period of time, if this is something that they might be interested in. So it may be the defined area, maybe 500 customers, or maybe it's only 200 customers, whatever the the boundary lines are. Once that's done, then, because there's that there's going to be that upcharge cost to the customer of anywhere between $25,000 to $4,000 for the upgrade of their panel. So everything is, if you think about it, all the wires come in from the very top of their panels, but now they have to dig a trench on their property line, and they have to change this panel out because the wires come from the top, and now the wires need to come from the bottom portion of it. So they need to hire a contractor to dig this trench and then go into where their box is going to be located out on the sidewalk area. So we look at that and we do those surveys ahead of time, because if we find that there's not going to be a lot of interest in that whole thing, we sit down and we do a town hall meeting, we talk a little bit about it, understand what their concerns are at that period of time, and make some determinations if it's going to be something that we're going to be able to do, and if the customers really, truly want to be undergrounded in those areas.
Because I assume that the cost to underground is socialized across the entire customer base. It's not just limited to that neighborhood.
Exactly.
So everybody's paying for it if we do it, and so it's, okay.
Yes. So the actual infrastructure portion of it, from the utilities perspective, yes, that's paid by all the ratepayers, whatever areas that we go into.
But the residential portion, the homeowner pays that?
Yes, the homeowner ends up paying that portion of it.
Homeowners also have the option to petition to be undergrounded in the neighborhood. So then in that case, they'll pay for the majority of the costs. If AT&T and the city didn't select that neighborhood, they have that option to petition. And then this is the last slide for the electric. So this is just showing the reserve forecasts for the next 5 years. So currently we're slightly below, which is why we've had to raise rates the last couple of years. And that should bring us hopefully back up somewhere in the middle of the guideline. And going further out, we'll start going back down to near the lower range of the guideline. So with that, I'll open up questions for the electric fund. We can always come back later too, if you guys want.
So I've got one question. It shows up on the slide where you kind of summarized that the expenses were 158 million. I'm sorry, revenues 158 million, expenses 172 million. Mm-hmm. So the difference between those, I assume, comes out of reserves.
Right.
And that's why you see a dip in the reserves for fiscal year 19.
That's correct. So it's either from reserves, or we can also borrow from the electric special project reserves. So it's a repayment to ourselves in a few years. Or else the other part that makes up the difference is the salary savings and contract savings, or CIP, the unspent money. That will go back in the reserves as well.
Right, but for the purpose of the budget, you've got to obviously cover the difference between the revenue and expenses.
Right. So in the beginning of the year, we'll use reserves to cover the budget, whether or not we spend it all. If we don't spend it, it goes back into the reserves bucket.
And the same is true, I guess. The same is true for the other funds as well, because all but one of the funds, I guess all but the fiber, the expenses exceed revenue.
Right.
Fairly.
In order for us to issue contracts or award contracts, we need to have the budget in place. So without the budget, we couldn't even get the work done. So whether or not we spend it on 1 year or multiple years, that will depend on the job itself. So the budget could get reappropriated year over year, which happens pretty often for the CIP budget. Yeah. So we may budget 20 million, but we may only spend 10 million.
So I've got another question that relates to that, but I'll come back to that after you've gone through all the discussion.
Okay. All right. Next is the fiber fund. So we have started the fiber rebuild project. We have put in a new connection in the Palo Alto Internet Exchange to the Park Boulevard substation to increase the capacity in the downtown area. And we've also installed fiber optics services to monitor the storm drain areas and the public work pump stations. Upcoming initiatives. So we are hopefully should be issuing the RFP to the FTTN network business case. So this has been going on for maybe 6-7 months. We've had many iterations and reviews from both the Citizens Advisory Committee, staff, and back and forth. So I think we're finally there where we're going to release it this month. And this RFP will help us with a business case for fiber to the node network, a high-level design. It's going to do a market assessment of what's competition that's currently out there. We're also going to include a community interest survey. And then also we're going to help evaluate ordinances to help lower construction costs. So it's a lot in this one RFP.
And are you going to have that chart that we wanted that sort of looks at the applications that are going to be enabled by?
I think that was included in the matrix.
Okay, great.
If I recall.
Do any of the commissioners want to see the RFP after it goes out?
I'll be happy to send it out to the full.
Okay.
Okay. So another project we're working on this year is installing Wi-Fi to some of our unserved city facilities at Cubberley, Lucy Stern, and the golf course. So right now we're in the PO stage and ordering the equipment and getting a vendor on board to do the installation. So that should be done hopefully the first half of fiscal year 19. And finally, we're continuing to upgrade different segments of the fiber network. To help, now we're going to be targeting the Stanford Research Park area. We'll move over there. So the fiber fund's relatively small, so you see it's a kind of spread evenly. Salary and benefits shows 30%, but there's really only 7 people assigned to the fiber fund. So even though it represents a large portion of it, it's a relatively small staff. And CIP is 1.7. Most of that is because of the fiber rebuild project. We've allocated about 1.2 million in the next couple of years to address those other areas at Stanford Research Park. These are the CIPs we just talked about. Oops. I guess I don't have a reserve chart for fiber, sorry. So this is the last slide for fiber. But currently we have about $28 million in the reserves in the fiber fund. Any fiber question before I move to gas? Okay. So for gas accomplishment, we started at GMR 22, which is the neighboring areas, part of downtown, also the university project. So we're replacing 19,000 linear feet of pipelines and 1,400 services. Upcoming initiatives is phase 2 of the cross-border program. So we're going to be targeting high priority areas like high concentration areas, schools, universities, hospitals, areas that didn't have the excess valves, the excess flow valves. And also the other one was where the depth between the laterals and the wastewater and the gas were closer together. So they're farther away. We know there's less likely of a cross-bore. We'll be conducting a gas cost of service study. The last one was done in 2012. And we'll finally be replacing all our ABS and 10-night material services. So we've been having a major push in replacing all the ABS pipes just because they're a little more brittle. And we're going to replace all these with PE pipes.
Okay.
So the gas budget, this is the cost drivers. It's relatively spread out. Commodity is again the majority, but then you also have your CIP, general fund transfer, salaries and benefits. Again, like Mr. Donner here has mentioned, a lot of this we can't really control. Some of these are kind of fixed costs or non-discretionary costs, maybe. And here are the significant year-over-year changes. So the biggest one, of course, is the cross-border. So we're hoping this is going to be a 3-year program, at least, to start with. So that's a $1 million increase. Commodities going back down by $800,000. That's because the market prices have gone down. And finally, CIP is decreasing slightly. But we do have that major upgrade downtown in the GMR 22 project. So that's coming in at $9 million. So we'll be busy working on that this year and next year.
So Dave, how much, just out of curiosity, is our carbon neutral gas policy cost us?
I'll defer. Jonathan, no?
It's about 4% of the commodity, isn't it?
The gas carbon offset.
Lisa said it's 4% of the commodity, is that right, or is it?
That's up
It's
to
less than that, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's,
Hey, man, come up here.
I'd have to look up the exact numbers, but the upper, I believe it's 4 cents per therm impact on the bill, which is ends up being below a 0.5% increase in the bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. You can stay too. don't have to do this, okay. All right.
What's our exposure if the CPUC agrees to PG&E's request to increase the price of, the transfer price of gas?
I'll stay up here. So the cases are still in process, and they often come down quite a bit. But some of the one of the increases that's proposed and upcoming could be as much as a 10% increase on the bill, which is astonishing.
And that's like the water that, if that happens, we're just not going to have I understand that we're doing what we can to try and convince the commission that it shouldn't be so high, but I assume it's like the San Francisco water, that if that's what happens.
I can talk a little more about that. So, I mean, not only are we doing things, but we look for other groups whose interests are aligned with ours, and we make sure two things. We work with those groups to push back on the total costs included in the transmission plan, and then number two, any restructuring to make sure that costs aren't shifted from other users to us. And a lot of this is being driven by some of it's being driven by a lot of it's around gas storage. So I think people may have heard in the news around the Aliso Canyon, problems with Aliso Canyon down in Southern California. So PG&E's had to do a major rebuild of their storage, gas storage systems, which are still, despite decreases in gas use, are still needed to manage, daily and seasonal variability. And those are the costs we're talking about. And it is a significant cost that the whole state will bear.
Thank you.
And the one thing that I would say is that those types of costs are borne by all of California, not just our ratepayers, not just gas generators, but all of California.
All right, and the annual upcoming CIP projects. So one thing I do want to call out are the gas main replacement projects. Given the downtown upgrade bids we've been receiving, the price has gone up from about $3.5 million now to almost $6.5 million for the construction project for this, about the same size. So we are now budgeting at that level now. And then the gas replacement projects are basically replaced based on age, material, the condition of the lines, and leaks. And then one-time projects, again, is the smart grid, which is about $3.5 million over 4 years. And then about the upgrade, again, it's $9 million. So here's the CIP plan. So the GMR 22 and the upgrade downtown is actually not showing up in this slide, but a lot of it's going to be reappropriated to FY19. So it's a $9 million project. We might get maybe 10% of it done or 20% done by the end of this year. So the remaining will be transferred over to FY19. So when you see the slide next year, you'll see the actuals will be a lot higher than what it's projecting right now. And finally, the reserve forecasts. We're currently a little bit above the guideline just because it's taken a while for those CIP spending to materialize, because we had to rebid that gas project a couple times. And so going forward, it should come back down now. So just CIP spending wasn't spent. And that's it for the gas fund. Any questions? You guys are taking it easy on me compared to Shiva. All right, thank you. Next one's wastewater. So a couple highlights, completing finally the sewer system rehab, 24, 25, 26, and 27. So these were some major projects that's been going on for almost 3 years now. We're near completion. So that should be done by the end of this fiscal year. We'll be start designing and beginning construction of SSR 28 next year. We're also going to be doing a cost of service study for wastewater this year. And we'll be evaluating a new sanitary sewer overflow tracking system. The one we currently have is very old. It doesn't have all the functionalities. We've had it for about 8 years now. It doesn't have any mobile features. Can't watch the videos on it and so forth. So we finally decided we need to upgrade what we have. So we'll be evaluating what's out there.
Will that integrate with the CIS system then?
Hopefully, yes. There should be some integration, yes. Currently, the one we have does not integrate. So hopefully the future one would be able to, or at least integrate with some other programs we would have. It's like service orders and whatnot. Hopefully they could receive it and transfer it to the crews. But I think we haven't gone that far yet down the line. So we're still kind of at the exploration stage. But ideally it should integrate with the CIS.
But eventually, what we'd like to see it do is to integrate into our GIS system. So that way there, we can feel and see where there was some type of spill, and so we can track it, and we can keep some type of record with it. So this one actually doesn't do that as well. That's another reason why we're looking.
Just to Commissioner Schwartz's point earlier about, thinking about all these different systems we have, and some may not integrate now, but if we're going to upgrade them, we certainly want to integrate. And as we're planning for the CIS system or GIS or ERP is probably less applicable, but to be keeping track of all of those so we don't spend these millions of dollars, implement the system, and not have the robust system that we're all hoping for.
Yes. So when we do issue an RFP for software, we do mention all of the integration points. I think for the CIS system, I think we have like 20 different integration points. So those will be definitely a prerequisite. Wastewater projections are a change year over year. The only thing that's really going on mainly is the CIP. We didn't have a sewer main replacement last year because we were completing the other ones. So we'll be having one this year. And treatment charges, as you know, are going up because of all the CIP work they're doing at the treatment plant. I think it's a $40 million project over 5 or 7 years. And Palo share is about 35%. And CIP, these are the general projects: customer connections, system improvements, main replacements. So for sewer main replacements, we actually also look at capacity load to see if there is any constraints. If there are, then we would go ahead and replace them. It's mains with larger pipe sizes. Not much to show here. It's pretty the same. We're budgeting a replacement project year over year. And finally, the reserves again. It's currently slightly above, but that's because of there was no CIP project last year. But as we start doing CIP work again, the range will start going back down to the middle or down to the bottom. And I also want to note that the wastewater reserves are relatively small compared to the other funds. It's only at $6 million right now. Whereas your electric, you may have 20, 30 million.
Okay.
And that's it for wastewater. Okay, for water accomplishments, so we began WMR 26 construction, which is also near downtown. That started around September or November of 2017. It's ongoing. We're also rehab the Montebello Reserve, so that's about a 50-year-old tank. And now we're doing some studies to see, going forward, what we should do with the other tanks. They're all about a similar age. There's a couple other tanks that were built around the same time. So we're going to have a study completed hopefully in the next month, and they'll give us some recommendations on whether or not we should improve it or rehab it, or build a new one, or consolidate, and so forth. So we'll find out what the study says, and we'll bring those results back to you.
So the rest of the reservoirs that are up in the hills, they're all, as Dave mentioned, they're all the same age, and they're coming to year end. So we can do what we did with Montebello. We can spend the money of about $2.5 to $3 million and refurbish it. But the problem is, it's like only going to be good for about 10 years. So the question is now is that, do we spend that kind of money and rehab them, or do we spend about $2.5 million, just a rough estimate, about $2.5 to build a brand new one? So that's something that we're taking a look at. The other question is also too is that, do we need to keep all the reservoirs up in the hills? So we've been talking about maybe trying to find a location down in the flatter land portions of it that would be more of a super tank. Maybe it's like 10 million gallons worth of water and put it underground, as we did with the one in El Camino. The water quality is much better because it's not in that direct heat. It doesn't get the sun beat down on it. And so that's another area. So the one, as Dave mentioned, the study is going to be looking at those kind of things for us. And hopefully we'll have some feedback, and then we'll come back to all of you. I'd say probably the latter part of summer with some results on that.
It seems to me that this is one of the places that the UAC is perhaps out of sync with the city council, and that we might want to try and advise the city council, because I think that we tend to be a group that is looking at proactive maintenance so you don't end up with a problem. And some of the discussions in the finance committee have been kind of, well, why do we need to do any maintenance or plan for resilience or things like that? And I guess what would you recommend as the way that we approach this, so that we can make sure that we're getting our point across to the city council?
So perhaps one of our, as we get around to future meetings, we get a presentation on the water storage situation and the plans and the rehabs and the cost. I don't have a good picture of it overall, but maybe that's...
I think it's not just this one. I mean, this one was the one that popped out, but I mean, when we were looking at the gas mains and the cross-bore as well, that's one where, we've just been pretty consistent. And I'm glad we're taking the attitude we are, but we don't have the statutory authority to direct the funds. So that's why. So it just seems to me we've got to somehow make a connection there.
So maybe one of the thoughts, along with Chair Danaher, is that maybe we have to break down some of these reports a little bit more and ask for recommendations from all of you to push it to the finance group, and then we get approval then from the finance to move up to the council. At least then the finance groups would know that you heard it, you support what we're asking from a staff perspective. So that might be one way of doing it.
Okay. So that brings up one component. So when we went to Finance Committee for the rate proposal of 4%, they actually did not approve of it. They asked us to come back with some alternatives to see if we can lower the rate increases for this coming year and the future years. So we did present them some alternatives. One was to reduce our reserve levels. Another one was to bond finance some of the major CIP projects, like the AMI and the seismic rehab projects. And the third one was to reduce our CIP main replacement rate. So fortunately, they didn't agree with the reducing of the CIP rate, so that's great to hear, which is aligned with what you guys are recommending. And so, but they did select reducing the reserves. So that's what we'll be doing next year, slightly, or bringing the reserves to a lower level. So right now, we might be in the middle of the guidelines, so they want us to maybe go a little bit less than that. Is that fair? So there are risks to that, of course. If there's unexpected costs or unexpected expenses, we won't be able to use the reserves to offset it. It could cause higher rate hikes in the future, but they are aware of that. And then for initiatives, we have another cost of service study. So Jonathan and Eric will be very busy this year. We have 3 COSA studies. And then as Dean had mentioned, that study should be coming out for the Mayfield and Corte Madera reservoirs. And then we'll also be bringing you the business plan for the recycling plant in the next month, I think in June. It's scheduled to come to you. I think we just got the report today, so we'll be reading and discussing it and making sure, hopefully, it'll get to you soon. And finally, we are repairing the transmission main right now at Page Mill. It's a 16-inch pipe with a leaky valve, so that's being worked on as we speak. So here are the cost drivers of the water fund. Against commodity makes up the majority of it, 40% almost. And then CIP comes second. And then we also have debt and rent as well. Year-over-year changes, so CIP, an 8.9 million increase. That's because of the WMR 27. Oh, actually, I think it's mainly because of the seismic improvements. I think we budgeted $3 million for that, and a few million for the next WMR replacement, the water main replacement, the increase in costs. And then for commodity, it's just going up because of SFPUC rates, because of the Hetchy Reservoir or facility upgrades.
Well, in part because of greater consumption as well.
Also, greater consumption, yes. After the drought, people have been using more water, so since we've lifted those water use restrictions, we've seen an uptick in usage. So it's good and bad.
All right.
And these are the major CIP projects for water coming up. Thank you. So the seismic upgrades is the main difference between those 5 years. The first 3 years will be allocating about $7-8 million for those reservoir rehabs. And finally, this is the reserve line. Because of the higher consumption, we have a little more reserves. We're at the higher range right now. And so we could afford to actually not raise rates as much this year or next year. And finally, another thing we want to just highlight is that we are continually looking at our cost containment. We do have, as part of the strategic plan, under finance and resource optimization, we will be going through each of the utilities, evaluating, prioritizing what costs should be in and shouldn't be out, and kind of have a streamlined fashion. We'll also continue to look at our personnel. We'll upgrade or downgrade positions as needed, and also work with the city manager, the budget office, and HR on how to figure out the vacancy issues, whether now we need a contract out or just change the service levels, or what may be. And finally, we'll have KPIs in the strategic plan and to monitor our performance and expenditures. And I think that is it. And we'll end with our strategic plan.
A very useful presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Commissioners, questions, comments? Please.
This may be getting in the weeds here, but looking at the budgets in the packet, for example, just looking at the electric fund, if you look on page 14, it's got a series of figures for the CIP electric fund, particularly for the past years, which are useful for comparison. But then if you look at the attachment B, where you have just the CIP portion of the electric fund, the figures for the prior years are completely different.
Okay.
The figure for the current year is the same, but the figure for prior years is different. And I wonder if that is created by the fact that in some years the allocated money isn't spent.
I know for the actuals, I should have been relatively close. I know for the budgets, it was different just because for 18, I think in the summary sheet here, I used the adopted budget from last year. While I was in the CIP plan, I was using the new estimated budget, the revised budget, I guess.
Well, but if you look at the FY17, that should be actuals in both cases.
Well, wait, isn't that one that's the fund and the other one is the budget?
CIP breakdown.
That's the question I'm asking, if that's the reason for the difference.
Yeah, I do not know. I have to get back to you to figure out how to reconcile these numbers. Not positive.
Okay. I mean, it's obviously helpful to look back to see what was actually spent in prior years. It's just hard to know whether the number I'm looking at is what was actually spent or what was budgeted, but not necessarily spent.
I think one problem could be, I'm just guessing here though, there could be projects that were done back in 2017 that are no longer in the 18 or next year 5 years forecasts. So they dropped off of the book when they printed it. So there was no budget in outgoing years. Then they probably didn't report it. That's my guess, but I'll send you guys a reconciliation of the two numbers for all the utilities.
One other question, again, looking at the CIP budgets, we show revenue for customer connections, and we also show a cost for customer connections, but I noticed that in all cases, the revenue from customer connections is less than the cost, and I just wonder why we don't charge an amount for customer connections that will recover the cost.
So part of those service connections, the city does benefit from some of those improvements. So the difference is really what's benefiting the whole city, the network as a whole, versus what the customers sole cost, I think.
Yeah, so on that is that when we build the infrastructure to, say, this building, we'll say, then there'll be a benefits that we can sell that infrastructure upgrade to some of these other buildings around, where then the services that were provided from the infrastructure into the building, that's what the customers are actually paying for. They're paying for any kind of the materials that would have to be used, any of the wire, any of the transformer. If there's a special transformer that needs to be used just for that building, they'll end up paying for that portion of it. So our rules and regs are set that anything from a customer usage would be paid for by the customer, but anything from an infrastructure standpoint where we can share those infrastructure costs, and it could be anything from water side to electric or any of them. It's done that way.
That answers the question. Thanks very much.
So I have a couple questions. And I'm looking at page 14 of attachment A on the electric operating budget summary. Although actually my first question, so I'm looking at workers' compensation that's gone down by 28% in the budget, and I noticed it was the same in the water fund and in the gas fund. Can you talk about what causes us to budget 28% less for workers' comp?
I think the workers' compensation budget is decided by HR, so it's based on prior year claims. So if they see less claims, then they just allocate less money towards that.
Okay, I see. So it's been less. The money hasn't been spent in recent years, and so I see. Next question on, and this one's unique to the electric utility and revenues. Other revenue has a 21.5% drop. Does that have anything to do with hydro forecasts? Sorry, page 15, yep. Electric fund, electric operating budget, other revenue.
Probably is the hydro.
It's a 21.5% reduction, but it does look like 2018 is an anomalous year. I thought it might have to do with hydro, but I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, I think it was something about surplus energy. It was a $2 million decrease. So
Yeah, this is most likely hydro, but there may also be, are there any large one-time customer connection fees coming?
Okay. So that was Anna Vong. So one of the major changes from last year was we had budgeted $2.5 million for the VA hospital upgrade, but instead they've rechanged the schema, so it's a smaller budget for that. So instead of a $2.5 million budget, now it's $700,000. So the other revenue went down equivalently.
So the expected revenue is less because they're not planning to,
Build as big of a system.
okay. And then my last question was another one that I saw in all the funds in the budget reconciliation. So if we look at page 19, there's the electric budget reconciliation. They're not large amounts, but the pension trust fund contribution, the adjustment is going in the opposite way of what I would expect. It looks like rather than more money being spent on pensions, less money is being spent on pensions. And my understanding of pensions is that they're more expensive than we thought. So it was the directionality of that confused me.
Maybe because they budgeted for full employment and had a lot of vacancies.
I have to get back to you on that one as well. I don't know the answer to that one.
Well, could it be you plan for based on the number of assuming full
positions.
hiring, and you had a lot of 20 vacancies or something?
Right, I could confirm. So again, this is done by HR budget, these numbers up on top, the salaries and benefits.
Are you referring to the one-time budget adjustment
Yeah,
at the
it's just
top?
the reconciliation.
Yeah, so it's a one-time
It's a
item.
one-time charge in every budget that has the supplemental pension trust fund contribution looking like it's a contribution out of the pension trust fund and back into some other budget, which again was the directionality of that confused me.
Well, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a change from budget, right? So we may have budgeted a certain amount and it came in lower than expected, as opposed to it being a disbursement from a pension trust fund. Does that make sense? In other words,
I
Yes.
think what
I
Chair
may be
Danaher
right.
said was
Budgeted
correct.
for higher
yeah, what Chair
headcount,
Danaher said,
and at the
essentially.
end of the year, there were fewer, so.
We do a true up of what we budgeted and what
Gotcha.
actually was paid out.
Yes, I see.
One other comment, one thing that I think that Commissioner Forzell's comments suggest, and I had the same reaction, it would sometimes be helpful, instead of just having the adopted 2018 budget, if you know that your actual expense for 2018 is going to be less, to have a column of kind of estimated 2018 expenses, if they're going to be different from budget, so that provides maybe a better comparison for this year.
Okay. We'll check with the budget office to see if we can.
So forecasted.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be useful. Good. Warren?
First, I want to thank Dave for spending a lot of time on his Sunday answering a bunch of questions I had with my first budget review. That will spare you all. But one question was, similar to Lisa's, I think, on the so on page 14 on the utility, but I think there's a similar, it's similar in all the utilities. So the pension is going up, which is no surprise, but the retiree medical went down. And it's a little surprising to me for this year, and I'm wondering also, as we've talked about at many meetings about more staff retiring, what you think that's going to look like in the future.
I think also similar to the pension, I think these are based on actuals. So as we have less positions filled, you'll see a drop in those totals.
And what about sort of looking forward as?
If we're looking for the pension, the city as a whole is putting an extra more money into the pension liability fund. I think they're putting in 10% more than what they're required to by PERS into a trust to counter that later.
And that's on top of the 5% we're adding this year?
Yes. The 5. Is it the 5? Thought it was 10, but okay, I could double check on that one.
Quick question for Dean, from a COO point of view. Do the electric fund CIP projects I guess in terms of your COO happiness meter, is that meter pegged at happy on starting to chip away at putting the, like when there are transformer upgrades and things like that, the budget allows you funds to start to have smart grid type telemetry on those pieces of equipment? Or do you think that's something where we need to maybe come back and have some more discussion on how we help to lobby for that?
I think we need to lobby a little bit more on that portion of it. As you know, as Jonathan and Shiva were talking earlier in the whole smart grid portion of it, that was pretty much the components, the back office aspects of it, as well as the meter portion of it. But one thing that's not in there is when we start looking at what those components look like from being out and actually in the field. Those costs are not in that $19 million. So if we want to put some type of smart grid technology onto our transformers, we'll have to pull that out of the CIP, out of the electric funds. So it's not cost contained. So I think that I would be much happier once we get to that point. So right now, my level is about in the medium portion of it. It's, it is what it is and what we deal with every day. It's not the best, knowing that the technology lies out there, but for what we have, it works pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other comments? So I guess the staff recommends that the UAC recommend the council adopt the proposed operating and capital budgets.
Right.
Is there further discussion? Judith moves. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Okay, great. Thanks for the great presentation and the thorough report on this. Appreciate that.
I'd also like to throw in a thank you for the staff that met with the subcommittee a couple weeks ago and very patiently listened to all of our questions and explained a lot of things. And to the point that it was a very clear focus on CIP budget, which was exactly what I think was of interest. So that was great. Thank you.
We have one other report on our agenda here, which is the, well, actually, no, this is just, not for presentation. It's just a written report, right, on the demand side measures. Okay. And we have selection of topics for future meetings. For soliciting other ideas, I'd like to ask that when we raise suggestions at meetings, that they, even if they're not scheduled right away, that they be included at the bottom here. I think there are topics we've raised in the last couple of meetings that I could count on you folks to keep track of, and I'm not good about going back to my notes, but they aren't listed at the bottom. So, but one thing we did talk about earlier was maybe a short report on the undergrounding issue and Green Acres and the.
And that might be a perfect agenda item where we also then talk about the, the distribution level hardware to make that more reliable for Dean. I mean, I see them as tied very tightly together. I mean, if we keep putting more things underground but don't do that, we're kind of asking for a rough time.
Okay, thank you, Arnie. Warren, Lisa, thoughts on other topics you'd want on this?
Well, helping you remember your own suggestion of water storage.
Yes, I have that written down here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, good, yes. So that would actually be interesting for us, informative, since it's going to be a budget item, would be useful. ACT?
Well, I'm still hoping we'll talk about the Cool Block program. We weren't ready to do
Yes.
it this time, but hopefully.
When would you like to see that on the agenda? For August? Is our next? No, our next meeting is in June.
Well, I did want to talk about the meeting schedule, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be here in June, but it really depends on what the schedule is for bringing it to the city council, and that's still being worked out.
Okay, all right.
Well, I think that one of the things that's not on here that is going to be in either August or September is going to be the next smart grid AMI discussion. So it's not on here yet, but it's going to be there. And I want to talk about the schedule also, because I'm if we're only going to have one meeting this summer, the first week in August doesn't work for me, so I'm hoping we can either adjust it back into July or later in August.
All right, so let's come to
Okay.
meeting times in a moment.
Okay.
One thing we identified in the last meeting that would be interesting to have a report on is the water recycling programs, or what's.
That's in
probably-
there.
That's summer.
Is it?
It's in June.
Oh, okay, I missed that, or misinterpreted it. Okay, great. When you go out with the RFP for the fiber to the premise, how long before you get a report back, do you think?
So that's going to actually sit on the open market for about 30 days.
Okay,
Then we'll end up going through the process of finding the lowest bidder. And then at that point, we go and write a report to council with asking them from the authorization to pick whoever the person is. So, and that's usually 2 to 3 months after the RFP is actually given. So 2 to 3 months after that period of time. So we're hoping that the RFP will go out sometime in the middle of this month, here in the next couple of weeks. Cross my fingers, I've been promising all of you that it will go out. So I'm guessing that probably May, June, July, probably maybe around the August timeframe.
Yeah, I think in our timeline, we kind of sketched it out. I don't think we'll be reporting back. Well, for UAC, it might be sooner. I think for council, it was like first quarter of 2019.
okay.
So probably end of the year, maybe.
So we may not
gotta
need
get
we may not be point in having another FTTP agenda item, certainly until that report is ready, or would there be any interim report or
We could
presentation?
evaluate that point somewhere in between. I think we'll have a check-in.
Okay, that would be good. In your RFP, I would like to make sure they cover, all the reductions that have happened in installation costs and equipment costs and the like, and putting in fiber. This has apparently been quite a bit. And cool block, you got that. We don't know when to schedule it, but we want it on at some point. All right. So, any other suggestions? Enough on that. Let's go back to calendar. First, let me ask, as to the one that was the staff put up here in that first week in August. So Judith would be away. How about everybody else? What are the? That'd be August 1st.
So
Yeah.
I'm here on August 1st.
Okay,
I'm here.
you're there. I know we had a plea from Terry to reduce how many times we
Right.
switch things.
I think I'm okay, I just don't trust my memory.
I can, if you'd like, I can have Meredith send out a doodle poll to all of you for the August, if you like.
Okay, well, just, yeah, we might,
Because, what my request would be either to the week of July 16th, sometimes that week, or the week that's August 15th. So those would be my two requests if possible, to have it be one of those weeks.
you mean the week of August 13th,
Yeah, whatever.
August 13th?
Or August, sometime during that week, or,
Okay. Well, let's check on that. Would, if we do it on Wednesdays, would August 15th work for people?
I think so.
I'll be gone on August 15th. I think maybe the easiest way to do this is by a
All right.
doodle poll.
We'll get a doodle poll then, okay.
Okay. So, would you like to have a doodle poll also for July, or would just for
Yeah,
August?
well, right, if we're only going to have one meeting,
Right. Would-
then July would be an option instead of canceling the July meeting, we cancel
Yeah.
the August meeting.
I would suggest trying all the Wednesdays other than July 4th, all the Wednesdays in July and in August, and we'll see. But maybe not late August.
But sometimes we've done it on a Thursday.
Or Thursday, I don't know, I suppose. And maybe if there's a few months' notice, that works out for Terry.
Okay.
I'll throw in there that I have trouble with June 6th. And if it's just me, then we still have a quorum. If there are enough others, then the June date is at risk.
What I could do is I could have Merites send something out for Wednesdays, Thursdays for the month of July, other than July 4th week.
Yeah.
And then also do the same thing for August.
Okay. I will also be out of the country on June 6th.
Didn't somebody down on that end of the table also say missing June?
Okay, so that's 3 of us that are gone. Would maybe ask for June for check people's dates for late June, the last 2 weeks in June. See who's around.
See, I can do the 6th and 13th, but I can't do the 20th.
Well, we'll get the 20th and 27th in that.
Can you do a Thursday? Should I ask for a Wednesday, Thursday as well?
Well, the problem is I have a trip east on the 20th
Oh,
and
okay.
21st.
But do ask for Wednesday, Thursdays for each of those weeks, so just maximize
Last
the
2
chance
weeks.
of getting.
Okay.
And, so, great. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Can I ask one
Oh,
question?
please,
I'm sorry.
please.
So just a clarification on the fiber report.
Yeah.
Would it be okay maybe around the October timeframe,
Well,
just to get an update of fiber?
that'd
Or-
be fine, that'd be fine. Why don't you put it on to be scheduled at the
Right.
bottom, and then
Then
you'll let
you'll
us
know?
know based on the progress for that.
Okay,
that.
all right. Thank you.
All right, anything else? Motion to adjourn?
I move we
All right,
adjourn.
thanks. All right, adjourned. Thanks, everybody.